Good evening, everyone. Thanks for attending this session. I'm very pleased that you're here. And thanks, NASCOM, for the opportunity to talk about monetization of AI in healthcare. AI itself is such a buzzword these days. So I'm sure everyone is interested to explore what's going on and what others are doing. So I hope this session is interesting. Uh, but before I start, let me just talk a little about myself and GS Lab, what we do as a company, and then we can get started with the topic. I'm Nikhil Zoshi. I'm VP Business Development with GS Lab. I'm based out of our California office in San Jose, and we are founded in 2004, about 17 years ago. Our primary focus of our DNA is to work with startups and product companies and work at building cutting edge products. And over these 17 years, we have built over 300 plus products for 100 plus customers. And they range from core networking stack to security and identity and access management and SIEM products to telecom products where we have open source and evolved packet core or wireless core in the open source domain. Then we have all sorts of streaming media solutions, which includes video audio conferencing and surveillance systems and whatnot. We have also built workflows based on visual workflows and video workflows. Then we have worked a fair bit on IoT and industrial IoT and manufacturing space. We have a practice in which focuses on fintech, where we have worked on lending systems, payment systems, some regulatory systems, and also around some of the regulatory reporting systems and market systems and so on. So we have a, as you can imagine, there is a fair bit of spread in terms of core engineering that we do, and our customers typically are startups and product companies, and in recent times we have been working with enterprises as well who are looking at innovation. So our core DNA is engineering and R&D, so to say. So what am I going to do today is to talk about AI in healthcare in general, what it means, what it entails, what we are seeing from our viewpoint. Then I'll take one specific interesting case of mental health product, happens to be our customers. We'll talk about what are the challenges in the mental health space. We'll talk about the solution for addressing those challenges, and then what it takes to build that kind of a tool and how GS Lab helped in building that tool. And then we'll take the hard problem of monetization and how the challenges around monetization and what strategies our customers adopted and how we helped in achieving some of those strategies. So let's dive in right away. So right now, if you see, AI is almost everywhere. Whichever domain you look at, whichever industry you look at, everyone is trying to use AI to improve productivity, to wow your customers, to improve your supply chain, to improve your operations, and so on. So there is immense use cases, usages of AI in almost every segment, and people are looking at AI as the next game changer. But in my mind, one area which really where AI is making the biggest leap of faith and biggest impact is healthcare. Because after all, it's one area where it significantly has the potential of improving the quality of life for someone. And that, in my mind, is the biggest winner in terms of AI. And there is a big wide breadth of what applications can happen in the AI using AI in the healthcare space. And given the constraint of time, what I'm going to do is to talk about some examples, some exciting use cases that we have seen in recent times, and just skim through it in this particular slide, and then we'll dive deeper into one specific use case. So patient engagement is big these days, and especially in COVID-19 situation where a lot of patient care is happening using telehealth and remote patient engagement. One of the important factors that healthcare staff is concerned about is the engagement level with the patient same? Does the patient feel as comfortable and confident while dealing with the doctor? And that's where patient engagement systems come into play and the AI comes into play, where it's trying to look at that communication stream and measure using learning models the level of engagement and give big suggestions for doctor to improve the level of engagement with the patient. Similarly, on the provider side, they are looking at their patients as customers. Uh, it's no more, gone are the days when long wait times in the waiting rooms were okay. Now they want to reduce the wait times by using AI-based models to optimize resource usage and personnel usage so that the in and out of the patient is quick. He gets the service that he needs quickly enough, and there are fewer, complications that are arising because of wait times. So at the same time, payer systems are looking at an interesting problem of looking at how for a given cohort of subscribers, how can they select the best available insurance plan from literally thousands of insurance plans that are offered by different insurance providers. So how can you find the right insurance fitment so that there is sellability on one side, but at the same time also profitability on the other side? So that's a fine balance, and AI is helping to optimize those where human, it's impossible to look at thousands of plans with very unique cohorts of subscribers for a particular insurance plan. Again, on the equipment manufacturer side, take an example of an MRI scan or a CAT scan or a X-ray for that matter. In the older times, people used to, the technicians or radiologists had to look and sit and compare and look for lesions or whatever they were looking for in those MRIs. Today, AI is detecting some of this and prompting the technician and the radiologist for to look at the right areas and even making decisions for them at times, which significantly reduces the time and effort that radiologist spends on every single scan. Research is taking a different ball paradigm altogether, where uh, the data is distributed across different hubs in pharma companies, in hospitals, in doctors, and whatnot. And the biggest problem is how to run research models which comprise data across these disparate sources. And how AI is changing is, rather than running the models and bringing the data in one place, which is because of the legal structures not possible, pushing the algorithms to the edge and running algorithms where the data exists so that the results can be collated, the inferences could be collated, and actionable insights could be generated from it. And again, last but not the least, the remote patient monitoring and the diagnostic space. I think this is where maximum investment is happening, because if you give the technology in the hands of the patient and empower him, and you can monitor him continuously, uh, a lot of problems which happen because patient doesn't show up in time, or patient doesn't know what to do in a particular case, can be avoided. And there are very interesting use cases. For instance, we worked on fall management for seniors, which kind of looked at if there was a fall and detected that fall and notified support systems and so on. We looked at spectrography for detecting efficacy of urine oncology drugs using urine samples. We looked at, one case that we are going to look at is in detail is detecting depression from voice data. So as you see, what I did is d- took one sample use case for each one of those and spoke about it. And there are multiple such buckets possible, and potentially, given the time, we cannot talk about each one of them. But AI is literally touching every aspect of the healthcare, and it's really exciting time. There's big investment happening in healthcare, and really, I think it's the bright time in terms of technology in this space. Now let's talk about mental health. You know, I'm sure all the other areas are also growing equally well, but I want to take mental health, and that's getting a lot of attention, especially in COVID situation, where a number of depression-related suicides have gone up, and so on and so forth. And mental health suddenly has come to a significant prominence. Uh, and it's not just during COVID times. It started about 4 or 5 years ago when a lot of investment started coming into this space. Today, if you look at it, if you talk in terms of numbers, there are nearly 400 plus startups in focusing on mental health alone. Some on ADHD, some on depression, some on Alzheimer's, some on Parkinson's, and so on and so forth. So mental health has the definite taken central, central stage. And there is a good reason for why mental health is becoming important in these current times. There are specific problems related to mental health care which are very unique as compared to other segments. The first one is social stigma. Uh, if someone has cancer, or if some unfortunate person is suffering from cancer or some like diabetes for that matter, there is generally a sympathy around. However, people don't look at mental health issues so kindly. It's very easy for people to pass judgment. "Arey, wo to pagal hai," and perhaps it's not right, but that brings social stigma. It makes people uncomfortable to go and talk about their problems to doctors, to open up and discuss it, and that if a lot of times results in suicides and a number of other things that happen in the society. The other part is accessibility. uh, in US alone, the rough estimate is, as per a study in 2017, is uh, 1 in 5 have some sort of a minor mental illness, mental health issue. A good percentage of that have something called as MDD, which is a major depressive disorder. Now that's a very large number given 300 plus million people in the US. If you do the maths, it's literally millions of people. Now look at the supply side of things. Uh, as per another report uh, you know uh, by Council of Psychological Behavioral Health, uh, their studies suggested that there is a shortfall of nearly 6,000, 7,000 to 15,000 psychiatrists in US alone by 2025. Look at the growing numbers. 15,000 shortfall of psychiatrists, and on the other side there's a continually growing number of people suffering from depression. What that translates to is a major accessibility issue. And then the third is limitation on the clinical methods itself. So the people have tried serotonin level using blood samples. People have tried, genetic mapping to see if there is someone is prone to or depression or any mental ailments. Those are possible, either ineffective or non-conclusive or too expensive to execute. So overall, there's one this major problem in mental health care, which is social stigma, accessibility, and limitations with clinical methods. So what this particular startup was trying to build is something like a thermometer for mental health. And how it is different is, uh, imagine how a thermometer would detect your fever, or if there was a simple tool which could detect depression, Alzheimer's, Parkinson. How easy would it be if someone was kind of forgetting things all the time? How easy, nice would it be to just look up an app, follow some protocol, and get find out if he or she was suffering from dementia. This is this kind of changes the playing paradigm completely. It addresses all the three challenges in some sense, because now the technology is accessible. You don't have to go, you can do some of the tests and comfort of your home, or at best go to the nearest lab and try it out, rather than having to go and see a psychiatrist where there is a natural inhibition. And because there is technology, the gap of demand and supply can be easily filled in, and this technology has been found to be a whole lot more reliable and dependable based on 15 plus years of research, which I'll talk about in a moment. So this company that I was talking about is a company called Sound Health, based out of Massachusetts in Boston, greater Boston area, and it's a bunch of very smart PhDs and researchers who have spent 15, 20 years in MIT Lincoln Lab and MIT Labs doing research on whether they can establish voice biomarkers which can detect depression, and use those biomarkers for for detecting an early warning system and building a thermometer. And they've found conclusive evidence that that's possible. Now, what they did when they did this test, it was essentially using a very small number of patients slash volunteers that they had picked up in the northeastern US region, and the test was done for a small sample space. However, the results were convincing. So these gentlemen decided to form a company and build a product around it and not just limit itself to depression where the original research was, but extend it to other areas like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and dementia and so on. So when we started discussing with them, the key parameters was we have to build a platform that is not just region specific and world, work across the globe. It can work in India, it can work in Europe, it can work in US, South America, everywhere. B, it has there has to be no delivery of any hardware, which means that it has to be accessible from a device that everyone has, that happens to be a smartphone, which pretty much everyone in this world, almost everyone has it, to put it mildly. So the second requirement was, can we build a platform which is global, as I said, be easily deliverable using a device that everyone has and easy to manage, and is based on this core research, so and is expandable so that you don't have to stick to one ailment alone, but can be expanded to other mental ailments and other health conditions. And this was a great idea because this kind of opens up, as we'll see in few minutes, about the monetization aspect of it few slides down the line. So when these bunch of researchers came to us, it was a perfect match. They were the subject matter experts with 15 plus years of research experience. We had experience of engineering and R&D based engineering with expertise in AI and ML, as well as building applications or products which would scale to literally millions of users. So it kind of was a perfect match to work together. And literally, when we started our engagement, we got bunch of research papers which became our requirement specifications. Our data architects initial few months were spent in understanding that research and documenting the findings and mapping that into architecture and how it would be implemented over a period of time. Now, so many of you who have seen AI may be familiar with this standard model of how data science process works. But for anyone who may not be initiated, I maybe spend a few minutes to just walk through that and then dive deeper on how we applied this to Sandel's problem. So you start with a hypothesis which maps the real world situation, which looks at takes the real world problem, takes a real world experience, if you will, from a subject matter expert. For instance, you have a hunch, or experts like psychiatrists know how to look for depression signatures when they're talking to their patients. All of this is real world information that needs to be codified in some sort of uh, product which can be implemented as in terms of technology. So we start with a world which is the hypothesis about your problem statement. Then you start with data capturing, and today you can capture data from all sorts of structured and unstructured data sources, sensors, devices, databases, and so essentially the second phase becomes data capturing. And in many projects I've seen, this becomes a pretty elongated phase because quality of your learning models depends on the quality of data and the quantity of data. Then you go into data preparation, where you start looking at the data and transforming it to a form which can be used in a learning algorithm. And it often involves uh, cleansing the data, signal processing, as in this case, and I will talk about that in a bit, and converting that into a form which is more tenable for any visualization slash learning models. Once you have that data normalized from multiple sources in one form, you look at doing visualization techniques to look at, you might have end up with hundreds of parameters and you may want to reduce those parameters. So a step called as parameter reduction using visualization. And then the second is you have some models in mind and you start playing around with those models to see how they, figure out which is the right candidate to pursue with the machine learning models. Then in the models machine learning phase, you look at that data and the selected models, and you start training with your training set and then testing with test set. And this can go in multiple iterations till you till you get what is called as convergence, which means that your learning model is able to predict with a fair probability about the hypothesis where you started with. And those learned models go into something called as inferences, which essentially is trained models which you can push to edge on a mobile device or wherever that decision making needs to happen. uh, from an inference perspective. So that's the typical data science or data engineering process, where it is you're using deep learning, a stochastic process, or logistic regression based methods. In all of those, that's the typical model of process flow that you would follow in any of those projects. Now let's look at how we implemented that for our problem of depression. So we started with biomarkers, and our starting point was those research papers, which were fairly complex, but at least gave a great starting point. And we looked at three type of vocal biomarkers: local, low-level acoustics, acoustic in coordination, and phoneme features. So these are essentially our voice typically has roughly few thousand parameters potentially, but about 500 of them which are more significant that you can detect and use them for all sorts of training models. And based on this research, these three categories were more relevant from a depression perspective. We looked at another set of models, and we'll talk about that in a few slides about looking at another use case. But from depression or mental ailments perspective, these three categories were what were relevant. So we started with the world of that research paper, not just hunch, but a theory about it worked for a small cohort of samples and patients. It will work for large user group and large across geographies and across regions and across language barriers. Then it comes to data capturing, where we tied up with we did a lot of data capture in India. So some of these models are very relevant to India. Some of those, in fact, biggest training set we did capture in India alone, and GSLab played a key role in doing this by tying up along with the customer with number of mental health institutes, hospitals who offer psychiatric help, and so on. And one of the key aspects is building the technology. We have to build an app which can collect the data with the right fidelity of voice and so on, so that the data can get collected. You are able to tag the data on based on whether, if it's a training data, then you need to know we have the right tag, whether it is a positive or a negative set, and so on. And so have the right technology to capture the data, uh, coupled with the digital marketing aspect of it. And then naturally there is a legal compliance aspect. When we are collecting data in other countries, there were different rules. In India, there were one set of rules. In US, there are different set of rules. So it's a complete framework which has to be baked into the technology itself when you're capturing the data, so that it's compliant to all local regulations. And at the same time, it also needs to be compliant to all sorts of global standards, and from a usage perspective and privacy perspective. Once you have the data, you start getting into data preparation mode, and that's where we started doing feature engineering. And primarily, it started with digital signal processing and extracting those features, 500 plus features that we were extracting from the voice samples that we received. So we had thousands of samples, and then we did signal processing on these samples to extract the relevant parameters from those three buckets that I spoke about a little while ago. We have built a very nice model around it, and there's a nice white paper available on our GSLab's website named Physiological Model of Speech Production and Commonly Used Descriptors for Speech Analytics. I do recommend you to check it out in your spare time. Once this data preparation is ready, we go to data visualization, where we started using multiple techniques of visualization to reduce that 500 plus parameters to 60, 70 parameters, which are of higher relevance. So feature relevance to kind of reduce those parameter strengths, um, find correlations and covariances with each of those parameters, did box plots, Q-ness, co-founder impact, classification. So all sort of different techniques to do two things. One is find out to different models what is the relevance and correlation to different parameters, and hence reduce the parameter set based on their impact it has on the hypothesis that we were working with. And then once we have that sort of a data available, then that can be then used in subsequent phases for model training and model learning. Once that was ready, we started working on those proprietary models that our customer had given based on their research. Naturally, those had to be expanded when we are looking at a larger data set from different regions. And over the period, those models also grew, and multiple models evolved from one core model that we inherited as that research paper. And those models started going into model repository. And once the training and we had significant convergence, we had we were at a point where those can be pushed into building real insights in real world. Back in those days, there was no MLOps platform, so we wrote our own inference bridge, what we call an inference bridge, which is in a nutshell MLOps accelerator. And again, there's a very nice ebook on our GS Labs website, which I would recommend you to look up, written by my colleague who's Srinath Krishnamurthy, whose focuses on the data science group. Once our inference was ready, now was the time to deploy in various regions. And imagine if your data cannot cross country borders, every country's data needs to reside in that country alone. Now, if we have to deploy in large number of countries, the cost of infrastructure can itself uh, root out all profitability from such a venture. So it was important that whatever scalability was desired and whatever infrastructure was to be designed was such that it was cost effective, it was easy to manage, the operational cost was low, the capex was low, and hence we started with serverless architecture. Uh, Extremely scalable and yet very cost effective, very low on the effort required to maintain that infrastructure. And basically we delivered huge savings in terms of how the whole show needs to be run across different regions and with all sorts of data separation. Again, we have a generic approach to improving scalability and availability using serverless architectures. Another ebook available on GS Labs website if you guys want to check it out. uh, Great. So we ended up engineering a nice product which did a lot of things, was cutting edge, addressed a great problem of depression, a problem that was a burning need. Uh, but commercialization is the key. Building product is only half the battle. I might say quarter the battle. Commercialization is the harder problem. And let's look at how it was approached differently in this particular case. Commercialization for this kind of product has its own challenges. Let's look at few. First is adoption itself. To our surprise and to our customer surprise as well, the primary beneficiary of this kind of a tool, which is a psychiatrist or doctors, typically had resistance to adoption. One reason being they are not used to looking at these kind of technology products, which did to a fair extent the job that they did by doing 2 or 3 sessions and did a fairly good screening. Second, they perhaps thought a little as a threat in terms of whether this can completely take away their jobs. And we really had tough time explaining that. Think about thermometer. Just because doctors can gauge if someone is running fever doesn't, and if when the thermometers came along, they didn't make doctors redundant. This is a tool. It's like an early warning system which can help people to get access to psychiatrists and help get them to help seek help that they need. The second is around approvals, and FDA happens to be the most peculiar one. And I think similar approval problems are in every country. While uh, all sorts of emergency approvals are possible, full thorough FDA approval is a pretty challenging task. One is the process itself is fairly complex and very comprehensive in terms of documentation and proof that you have to show in terms of applicability of your product. A product for mental health makes it even more complex because of the abstractness that comes with it. There is a well-defined protocol, there is data to show based on what psychiatrists do. However, technology trying to emulate exactly same is not an impossible task, but it's definitely a longer drawn task and definitely needs more effort. And then we spoke about data restrictions, that every data has to reside in that country, which means that there's a training models that we have to develop for each country. Although it shouldn't matter because language in this case doesn't matter. We are looking at, we're not talking about what a person is saying or in what language he or she is saying, but about hollowness of his voice and the texture of his voice and the characteristics like this. But we did realize that to get the local approvals, we'll have to use some of the local data and get the right approvals in place so that it can be deployed in those specific geographies as well. So there are a fair bit of challenges when it comes to commercializing such a product. So the approach to monetization was multifold that Soundhealth took, and GSLab is very proud to be a part of that journey. First is from the very beginning, they said we don't want to be a single trick pony. We just don't want to only Parkinson's or only Alzheimer's or only depression, but have multiple ailments that we could cover. So right from day one, our architecture and the technology was built with this singular goal in mind, that the model repository eventually that will evolve should have multiple models, and based on different protocols, be able to use these models in different scenarios. The second is, but these are still happen to be clinical diagnostics, which means that it has to go through approval cycle in every country. But there were also non-diagnostic or non-clinical features which could be detected, which can be in enterprise scenario could be very relevant. For instance, being able to detect fatigue and tiredness. Now, a lot of these current, take an example. Let me take an example to explain this a little bit better. Uh, let's take an example of air traffic controller. If someone is on job for 6 or 8 hours, usually 8 hours is okay, or 6 hours is okay, but a particular day has been more stressful. If the ATC on job is appearing more fatigued, then is it not a better idea to relieve him to improve safety of the air safety of the aircraft coming in and going out? Similarly, if customer support staff is too tired, he may not be offering the best service to uh, customers who are dialing in or going on your website and so on and so forth. So uh, the expandability of the solution is to look at these factors like fatigue and tiredness and apply them to enterprise problems and improve how they can do things better by improving either safety, improving customer satisfaction, customer delight, or wherever other factors are required. And there are a number of different things that we have looked at besides fatigue and tiredness, which can be applied to a non-clinical environment. This can be deployed on edge for making some of the decisions on the edge. In fact, almost all use cases, the idea is that we have to give it in the hand of the customer. So you don't have to always rely on B2B channels where the tool is in the hand of a psychiatrist or a lab who's testing it, but it's also possible to get this app in front of the individual customer so that he's able to do a primary screening for himself. That the tool is easy to use. There's great training available, videos available. You can look at the tool and execute it as required. And then the last is API based monetization, and that is kind of picking up quite a bit. So API based monetization is the way to go. No company can create its own products which are so great in the world that ideas are dime a dozen, and you might have a great product, but you never know who else is trying to build on top of your core technology. And API based monetization is a great way. And what Sond has done is they have opened up their core technology as API so people can build applications on top of it and monetize it as they may please. The best solution that we saw was in terms of what is called as Sond 1. And Sond 1 is a great response to current COVID situation. What it does essentially is it detects a baseline's respiratory symptoms about how your nasalness of your voice or how you breathe and so on and so forth. So it kind of baselines your respiratory symptoms and then detects any change in symptoms. So for instance, if you imagine a company, a technology company like all the members of NASCOM, if you have employees who are working from home, you're worried about their well-being, then you can baseline their respiratory path and then keep monitoring if there is any change to see if they need to see a doctor, or if they have any sort of even cough or cold or to COVID that can be detected. that can also be a great back to work screening mechanism for companies who are wanting the staff to come back to office at some point of time. Even if there is a vaccine and even if there is a relatively good herd immunity, you would want safety of your employees. So screening of employees at comfort of their home, and the someone who's making decisions to get the data in a single dashboard to decide who comes back to work and who needs to stay at home, using some of the screening mechanisms. And since a lot of data is gathered and generated in India, uh, this is very relevant in the Indian context also. And a number of tech companies are trying this product out from back to work screening and uh, keeping tap of their employees' well-being. So all in all, this is an interesting I thought use case that we have worked on. It's a great product. It's going through an FDA approval cycle for clinical usage and already being used, has emergency usage for COVID detection or early back to work kind of screening system. And again, for non-clinical situations, it's already in production. uh, Thank you so much. It was great talking to you. I hope you liked the details I shared during this presentation.
Thanks, Nikhil. To our audience, Nikhil and GS Lab team is available in the networking lounge. You have a chat option available at your end to interact with the team. So please do avail the same. Thank you so much, Nikhil.
Thanks.